"Step back or she's banned," Marcus snapped, his voice carrying over the shimmering pool water like he owned the air itself. His security guard shoved my daughter against the iron fence, and the clang echoed across the concrete deck. Chlorine stung my nose, the hot pavement burned through my shoes, and Emily's sharp gasp cut through everything else. Marcus stood smug, clipboard tucked under his arm, like this was just another fine he'd already decided to issue. I didn't flinch. "Careful with your hands," I said, steady and low. My phone was already raised, the red icon in the corner pulsing. Because every second you touch her, city servers are logging it live. The guard froze mid-motion. The crowd of parents glanced up from their lounge chairs, and Marcus's smirk faltered for half a beat. He hadn't expected me to carry my own enforcement. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I stepped forward, shielding Emily from the heat of Marcus's stare. "You don't know me yet," I continued, calm, almost conversational. "Daniel Harper, former city inspector. I spent 20 years teaching contractors where the line was and making sure nobody cut corners with safety. That fence behind you? My late wife fought to install it after a neighbor's kid nearly drowned. You're not just leaning on metal, you're leaning on her legacy." Emily clutched my arm, her breathing shallow. The black iron bars had a scrape of rust at the weld where her shoulder hit, and the sight lit something inside me. That fence wasn't just a structure, it was the last fight my wife chose before the cancer took her. She'd smiled through chemo while pushing the petition, rallied neighbors who didn't think the HOA would ever spend the money, and she'd been right. Her fingerprints were in those bolts, her memory alive in every vertical line of iron. To see Marcus weaponize it, turn it into a threat against my daughter, was like watching someone spit on her grave. My throat burned with the weight of it, but my voice didn't waver. The cicadas buzzed in the hedges, drowning out the uneasy silence of neighbors. I caught a flash of Laura Chen's eyes from across the pool deck, hesitant, nervous, like she wanted to speak but swallowed it back. Her silence told me everything about Marcus's grip on this place. People feared him more than they trusted each other. Emily shifted against me, still trembling. I bent close enough for her to hear only me. "You're safe," I whispered. She nodded, but her knuckles stayed white around the strap of her pool bag. The guard stepped back an inch, eyes darting toward Marcus for direction, but Marcus's mouth pressed into a thin line. He was calculating, deciding how far he could push before this slipped out of his control. The livestream timer ticked on my phone, 10 minutes running. The feed banner scrolling, forwarded to safety desk. I didn't need to explain it to anyone here. They'd see soon enough what it meant when city oversight saw video stamped with time, date, and geolocation. And Marcus? He'd just made himself the star of an official compliance record. Where are you watching from? I want to know, because this is just the beginning. The HOA chose the wrong man to corner, and they don't even realize the trap they've already walked into. I wasn't just protecting a daughter or honoring a wife's memory. I was about to unravel the kind of empire Marcus built on intimidation and expired authority. And when the inspectors arrived, and they would arrive, his name wouldn't just be whispered with fear, it would be written in violation reports, fines, and suspension orders he couldn't bully his way out of. He didn't know it yet, but the balance of power shifted the moment he laid hands on my kid. Marcus's glare stayed fixed on me, even after the guard stepped back. His jaw worked like he was chewing gravel, but he didn't say another word in front of the watching parents. He turned on his heel and strode toward the clubhouse, the security guard trailing behind him, muttering under his breath. I knew better than to think that was the end. Men like Marcus didn't retreat. They regrouped. Emily clung to my arm until we reached the car. She didn't speak, and I didn't push. I'd learned long ago that silence was her way of processing. The scrape on her shoulder was angry red where it had slammed against the iron fence, and seeing it made my chest feel hollow. I closed the door gently after she slid inside, then stood for a moment, staring back at the pool area. Parents had already returned to their conversations, pretending nothing had happened. That was Marcus's grip at work. Make trouble for him, and you'd pay for it later. By the time I drove the 2 minutes back to our street, the first violation slip was already taped to my mailbox. Bright yellow, bold letters. Improper vehicle placement. Fine $250. My truck was square in my own driveway, nowhere near the curb. The timing was too perfect. Marcus hadn't wasted a second. I peeled the slip off slowly, the adhesive tearing in my hand. Emily's reflection caught in the windshield as she leaned forward from the passenger seat. "He's just trying to scare you," she said softly. She wanted it to sound confident, but her voice shook. "He is," I answered, sliding the paper into the glove compartment. "And he's good at it." The truth hung heavy between us. Marcus's whole system relied on fear, fines, threats, patrols. It was why neighbors stayed silent, why Laura Chen's eyes had looked so conflicted at the pool. He'd trained everyone here to look away. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I walked the length of the cul-de-sac. The air smelled of cut grass and faint lake algae drifting from the waterline. Porch. Lights blinked on as I passed. Curtains shifted. Neighbors watched but didn't step out. When I reached the corner, I spotted another slip fluttering under a wiper blade, this time on the Ramirez family's minivan. Excessive street parking, fine $200. Same bright yellow paper, same bold letters. The Ramirezes had 4 kids. Their driveway had been full since the day they moved in. This wasn't about rules, it was about pressure. As I stood there, I heard muffled voices from across the street. 2 guards in black polos leaned against the fence line, laughing. "Greer's got Harper spinning already," one of them said. The other snorted. "Kid got shoved, and he's still standing around like he owns the place. Won't last long." My fists curled before I forced myself to unclench them. Anger wouldn't win this fight. Evidence would. And they just handed me more than they realized. Their words, their timing, the freshly posted slips. Marcus was building a case of harassment one piece at a time, and I was already recording. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, its mic still hot, capturing every word. The compliance app didn't just stream video, it logged audio too. All of it was time-stamped, geotagged, and forwarded to the city's system. The guards didn't even glance my way, too confident no one would dare challenge them. Back home, I checked the footage. The shove at the pool, Marcus's command, the guards laughing about it afterward. It was all there, lined up in a neat sequence. I felt the old inspector's instinct kick in. Patterns mattered more than single moments. A violation slip on its own could be shrugged off. But harassment with witnesses, unlicensed enforcement, and intimidation, that was a structure you could collapse if you knew which beam to pull. When I finally shut down the screen, the clock read past midnight. Emily's door was closed, her room quiet. I stood in the hall a long time, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioning. Marcus thought he'd silence me with a yellow slip, but all he'd really done was give me another piece of proof. The game he'd built here depended on fear and compliance. I'd spent my whole career breaking down systems that hid behind false authority. He just didn't know that yet. The cicadas outside started again, their chorus rising through the night. I tightened my jaw, looking down at the slip still clenched in my hand. Marcus was playing by intimidation. I was playing by evidence. And sooner than he realized, the people who mattered would be watching the same way I was. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, sharp and golden, but it didn't feel like a new day. The yellow slip still sat on the counter where I'd dropped it. Its corners curled from where I'd clenched it too hard. Emily poked at a bowl of cereal, quiet, her shoulder tender where the fence had scraped her. I forced myself to look away from the bruise forming there, and focused on my coffee instead. Marcus had turned our home into a stage for his intimidation, but I wasn't going to let Emily carry the weight of it. By mid-afternoon, I knew I needed to be seen out in the neighborhood. If fear kept everyone hiding, Marcus won without lifting a finger. So I walked Emily down to the lake trail, the path curving past manicured lawns and the long row of townhomes that fronted the water. The cicadas were quieter in the heat, and sprinklers ticked in rhythm across the grass. At the far bend, near the gazebo that overlooked the lake, I spotted her, Laura Chen. She leaned against the railing, a folder of real estate flyers clutched in one hand, her eyes darting toward the clubhouse across the water. She noticed us before I spoke. Her shoulders stiffened, and she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, with hands that trembled slightly. Emily, sensing the tension, slowed her steps, but I kept us moving forward. Laura's lips parted as if to say something, then pressed shut. Her foot tapped against the wooden planks of the gazebo, too fast, like she wanted to bolt but didn't know where to run. "Afternoon," I said evenly. Her eyes flicked to Emily's shoulder before she looked away, gripping the folder tighter. The papers crinkled, bending at the edges. She was remembering last night. Of course she was. I could see it in the way her throat worked when she swallowed, in the way her gaze lingered anywhere but on me. "You saw," I said quietly. Not an accusation, just a fact hanging in the air between us. Laura exhaled, her shoulders sinking for a moment, then rising again with tension. Her voice trailed off, barely audible. She turned her face toward the water, but her hands gave her away. Her knuckles were white around the folder, nails digging into the glossy paper as if she could hide inside it. Emily shifted beside me, her sneakers scuffing against the boards. Laura's eyes flicked toward her again, and for a split second, guilt flashed raw and undeniable. Her body leaned forward as though she wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe the truth. But then she pulled back sharply, folding her arms across her chest like armor. I recognized that posture. I had seen it dozens of times during inspections, when a contractor knew a shortcut had been taken but didn't dare admit it with the boss standing nearby. The weight of fear pressing down harder than the instinct to do what was right. "Marcus keeps records," Laura said at last, her words clipped, careful. "Listings, complaints, every homeowner who's ever crossed him. He threatened once that if I didn't play nice, he'd bury my business. No one would buy a house from me again." Her voice cracked, then steadied, her chin lifting with forced defiance. But her arms stayed locked, hugging herself too tight. Emily's eyes were wide, fixed on her. Laura noticed and looked away quickly, blinking hard. "I didn't see anything," she added, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. She turned sharply, pretending to shuffle through her flyers, hiding behind the motion. I let the silence hang. She'd already told me more than she intended. Her fear was real, but so was her guilt. The conflict played out in every twitch of her shoulders, every time her eyes darted back toward Emily's bruise. As Emily and I walked away, I glanced back once. Laura was still standing at the railing, head bowed, the flyers drooping from her grip. Her foot tapped again, uneven, like she was arguing with herself. I knew then she was caught between survival and conscience. She hadn't chosen a side yet, but the struggle was there, alive in her body language. And when the time came, she wouldn't be able to stay silent forever. The wind carried the faint echo of kids shouting by the pool, and for the first time since last night, I felt the shift. Marcus wasn't just fighting me. He was fighting the quiet battle inside every neighbor who'd seen too much and said nothing. Laura was proof of that. She was proof his control was cracking. The wind off the lake still clung to me as Emily and I walked back up the trail toward our street. I could feel Laura's silence following us like a shadow, heavy and unsettled. Her guilt had been written in every twitch of her hands, but Marcus's grip was stronger, for now. I knew fear kept people quiet until something snapped, and Marcus had a talent for finding the breaking point. When we reached our driveway, another slip waited, pinned neatly under the wiper of my truck. This time the accusation was unauthorized storage, fine $300. I stared at it, jaw tight. The bed of my truck held only a toolbox and a coil of rope, nothing the bylaws could possibly touch. It was harassment, pure and simple. Emily climbed the porch steps slowly, her shoulders hunched as if the house itself couldn't shield her anymore. I slipped the violation into my pocket without a word and walked back down the block. My neighbors' homes glowed warm behind drawn curtains. It should have been a quiet afternoon, kids on bikes, dogs barking. Instead, there was a stillness that didn't belong, the kind that said everyone was waiting for the next blow. And Marcus delivered it. By dusk, his guards were back, posted at the entrance of the cul-de-sac, clipboards in hand. They moved from driveway to driveway, leaving slips like breadcrumbs. I watched from the corner as one of them slapped a notice on the Petersons' fence, another on the Ramirez's basketball hoop. The guards joked as they worked, their laughter carrying on the humid air. I stepped closer, not enough to draw attention, but close enough to catch their words. "Greer says by the weekend, half these homes will be paying fines. Easier than raising dues." The other chuckled, tapping his pen against the board. "And the best part? They don't even argue anymore. Just sign the checks." Cicadas went silent in the hedges, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I felt the old inspector's instinct surge: patterns, evidence, behavior. Marcus wasn't just abusing authority, he was systematizing it, manufacturing fines to bleed the neighborhood dry. That mattered. A single violation was noise, but coordinated harassment? That was structure, and structure could be dismantled. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the compliance app humming to life. Its mic caught every careless word the guards spoke, their jokes, their arrogance, the precise time and location of every slip. They couldn't take any of it back once it was logged. My thumb brushed the red icon, watching it pulse. Across the street, curtains fluttered. Neighbors peeked out, then vanished again. None of them stepped forward, but when the guards moved toward Laura Chen's porch, I noticed her shadow behind the blinds. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped. She didn't open the door. The guards posted another slip: improper landscaping, fine $150, on her neatly trimmed hedge. Her blinds snapped shut. By the time the guards finished their route, half the cul-de-sac was plastered in the yellow paper. Driveways that had been clear an hour ago were suddenly labeled violations. It was theater, staged intimidation. I stood in the middle of the street, feeling the weight of every eye watching from behind glass. This was Marcus's stage, but I wasn't playing the role he wanted. I bent down and peeled one of the slips from the Ramirez's van. The paper crackled in my hand, cheap ink already smudging in the humidity. My phone camera caught the license plate, the timestamp, the guard's signature scrawled at the bottom. Piece after piece, the record was building: harassment logged, abuse documented, intimidation made permanent. When I turned back toward my house, Emily was waiting at the door, arms crossed, her eyes wide but steady. "They're everywhere," she said quietly. I nodded. "And that means they're leaving a trail." She didn't answer, but her expression shifted. Fear still there, but curiosity creeping in. She understood, even if I hadn't explained. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was preparation. The guards' laughter drifted faintly from the clubhouse as they reported back to Marcus. I tucked the slip into my pocket with the others, my jaw set. He thought paper could break people, but he didn't realize every slip was a nail in his own coffin. I stood in the kitchen that night, the stack of yellow slips spread across the counter like a crooked deck of cards. Emily had gone upstairs, her door cracked just enough for the glow of her lamp to spill into the hall. I didn't want her seeing me like this, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on papers that screamed intimidation. My reflection in the dark window above the sink looked older, harder. But I wasn't just staring at fines. I was staring at a pattern, and patterns were my trade. The old inspector in me couldn't help dissecting it. Same template, same handwriting, same bogus infractions. No backing in the bylaws, no proper citations. The more slips I examined, the clearer it became. These weren't official violations. They were props in Marcus's intimidation play. And props crumble when exposed under the right light. I needed proof that reached beyond harassment, something structural, something undeniable. So I grabbed my jacket and stepped back into the night. The cul-de-sac was quiet, porch lights humming like muted beacons. But instead of turning toward the pool or clubhouse, I crossed to the guard shack planted at the community entrance. It was a squat brick cube, more shed than office, with a floodlight buzzing overhead. The guard inside barely looked up from his phone as I approached. His uniform polo was untucked, the stitched Cypress Point security logo already fraying at the edges. I'd seen enough security contracts in my career to know something was off. "Evening," I said casually. He grunted, tapping at his screen, not bothering to stand. No badge, no city-issued ID on his belt, not even a license number displayed anywhere on the shack wall. My eyes scanned the setup. No posted operating certificate, no compliance documentation, not even the mandatory shift roster that legitimate companies kept visible for audits. The details screamed louder than words. I pulled my phone halfway out of my pocket, its camera aimed low. The compliance app whirred, capturing the empty walls, the idle guard, the lack of credentials. Everything was time-stamped, geo-tagged, archived. The guard finally looked up. "Something you need?" His tone was casual, but his eyes flicked toward the phone, suspicious. Just checking if you're licensed to write these." I held up one of the slips between two fingers. His gaze hardened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair, one hand tugging his polo straighter. That silence was all the confirmation I needed. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so it carried weight. "I used to sign off on safety codes for this city. I know what credentials should be posted here. You're missing every single one." His jaw twitched. He looked away first, muttering something about talk to management. I didn't press. I already had what I came for. On my walk back, the night smelled of wet asphalt and blooming jasmine from someone's garden. My footsteps echoed against the empty street, each one steadier than the last. The discovery was small, but it was enough to shift the balance. Marcus hadn't just overreached, he'd broken the chain of legitimacy. His guards weren't licensed, his fines weren't enforceable. And when outside eyes landed on this, his empire of intimidation would collapse. Back home, I logged the footage. The app created a neat chain of entries: pool incident, guard laughter, bogus fines, shack with no, posted license. Each piece of evidence stacked into a structure of its own, the kind inspectors and city officials couldn't ignore. My fingers hovered over the screen as the clips loaded, one after another, building the case silently in the background. Upstairs, I heard Emily shift in her bed, the faint creak of springs. She'd fallen asleep, but I knew her rest was shallow. The bruise on her shoulder was still there, proof etched into her skin. I whispered to the empty kitchen, more to her than to myself. "We're not just enduring this. We're dismantling it." The slips on the counter fluttered when the air conditioner kicked on, scattering across the surface like discarded confetti. I gathered them into a single stack again, pressing them flat. They weren't just harassment anymore. They were exhibits. Evidence in a story Marcus couldn't control. The next morning, I found another envelope. This one shoved halfway through the slats of my porch railing. No bright yellow this time. White paper, official letterhead, Marcus's signature scrawled at the bottom like a challenge. Emily spotted it before I did, tugging it free with a frown. Her thumb hovered over the flap. Then she passed it to me, without a word. I unfolded it slowly, scanning the lines. Suspension of amenities. Effective immediately, Emily Harper is barred from using all Cypress Point recreational facilities due to endangerment and non-compliance. My stomach tightened as I read the words out loud, my voice harder with every syllable. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They were targeting her directly. Emily's face paled. "They're banning me?" For what? I didn't answer right away. The morning air smelled of cut grass and damp concrete, the sound of sprinklers hissing faintly down the block. I forced myself to breathe evenly before meeting her eyes. "For nothing that holds up in law," I said finally. "This is intimidation, nothing more." But it cut deeper than any yellow slip. Marcus had crossed a line, turning my daughter into a weapon against me. That paper wasn't just harassment, it was a shot at her dignity, her sense of belonging in the place her mother had fought to make safe. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease flat with deliberate calm, though every nerve in me screamed. I drove her to school that morning, the silence heavy between us. She stared out the window, fingers tracing invisible lines against the glass. When I stopped at the curb, she finally spoke. She wouldn't have let them do this, would she? Her voice was small, but the weight behind it was enormous. "No," I said firmly. "Your mom fought for that fence to protect kids, not to punish them. Marcus doesn't get to twist her legacy." She nodded, but the way she walked into the building, shoulders hunched, head down, told me the damage had already begun. I didn't go home. Instead, I steered toward the clubhouse. If Marcus wanted to escalate, I wasn't going to hide. The building loomed at the center of the neighborhood, its brick walls trimmed with manicured hedges, a flag flapping lazily above the door. Inside, the smell of coffee and printer toner hung in the air. The receptionist gave me a polite, brittle smile and pointed toward the back office. Marcus sat behind a wide oak desk, the kind meant to look impressive. He didn't rise when I entered, just leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk tugging at his mouth. "Mr. Harper," he said smoothly, "I trust you received the notice I had dropped the folded letter onto his desk. I received your threat." His eyebrows lifted, mock offense painted across his face. Not a threat. A disciplinary action. Your daughter was involved in a disturbance at the pool. We have to consider the safety of all residents. I leaned forward, close enough to see the faint sheen of sweat along his temple, despite his relaxed posture. What you have to consider is that unlicensed guards shoved a child against iron fencing. You escalated, not her. And you're stacking fines that won't stand a day under city review. For a moment, the mask cracked. His fingers tightened on his pen, tapping once against the desk before he stilled them. Then the smirk returned. You can appeal, of course, but those processes take time. In the meantime, the suspension holds. I let silence fill the room, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Then I straightened, slipping my phone from my pocket. The red icon pulsed faintly on the screen. His smirk faltered as his eyes flicked to it. This conversation, I said evenly, is already logged. I turned and walked out before he could answer. The receptionist's eyes followed me, wide and uncertain, as if she'd just witnessed a crack in his armor. Outside, the sun was harsher, glaring off the pavement, but I felt steadier than I had in days. Marcus thought suspending Emily would break me. All it did was harden my resolve. The letter in my pocket wasn't a defeat. It was the proof I needed that this had turned personal. And once it became personal, I wasn't just documenting harassment anymore. I was dismantling the system he hid behind. I left the clubhouse with the letter heavy in my pocket and Marcus's smirk still hanging in the air like smoke. The sun bore down on the pavement, heat rising in waves, but my mind was already somewhere else, piecing together the chain of evidence, building the structure of a case brick by brick. The suspension notice made it personal, yes, but it also made it official. Marcus had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I turned down Maple Row, where the townhomes faced the lake, their porches shaded by narrow maples that hadn't grown enough to block the glare. I knew who I was going to see before my feet carried me there. Laura Chen stood on her stoop, fumbling with a stack of folders. She spotted me from half a block away. Her shoulders tensed, and she shifted the folders to her chest like a shield. Even from here, I could see the way her eyes flicked toward the street, checking if anyone was watching. I stopped at the base of her steps. "We need to talk." She hesitated, pressing her lips together until they whitened. The folders trembled slightly in her grip. For a long moment, it looked like she might retreat inside and shut the door. Then she exhaled sharply and stepped aside. 2 minutes, she said, voice low. Her living room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Flyers were scattered across the dining table, listings and contracts half sorted. She set the folders down but didn't sit. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, pacing once before meeting my eyes. "I saw what happened at the pool," she said quietly. The words came out fast, like if she didn't get them out now, she never would. "Your daughter didn't do anything." The guard shoved her, and Marcus stood there and let it happen. Her gaze darted to the window, blinds half tilted. "But you can't tell anyone I said this." I studied her. "You know I can't promise that." Her jaw clenched. She turned away, pacing again, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. "Do you have any idea what he's done to people here? He blacklists. He whispers to buyers, poisons sales. I lost 2 contracts last year after I questioned a landscaping fine. 2. That's a family's income gone because I crossed him." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand against her temple, as if trying to hold herself together. I can't lose more, but I also can't keep pretending." She stopped pacing then, finally facing me, and I saw the raw conflict in her eyes, fear sharpening against conscience. "You don't have to stand alone," I told her. "The city won't look the other way once they see the pattern. But they need more than me. They need witnesses." Laura shook her head, trembling. "Everyone's afraid. You think the Ramirezes will speak up? Or the Petersons? They've got kids, mortgages, no backup plan. Marcus counts on that." Her words dug deep, but they also lit something in me. "That's why we break the pattern, piece by piece." For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint whir of her ceiling fan. Then she pulled open one of the folders on the table. Inside were copies of violation slips, different names, different addresses, but all bearing the same bold lettering and Marcus's scrawl at the bottom. She pushed them toward me with shaking hands. "I wasn't going to keep these," she whispered, but I couldn't throw them out either. Every time I filed a sale, he made sure one of these appeared. Some buyers walked away because of it. I slid the papers closer, scanning them. The patterns jumped out instantly. The dates, the duplicate language, the timing aligned with property listings. It wasn't just harassment, it was targeted sabotage. Marcus wasn't only intimidating homeowners, he was manipulating the housing market for control. Laura's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. If he finds out I gave these to you, he won't, I said firmly. And even if he tries, this isn't just between you and him anymore. You've done more than you realize. This isn't silence anymore. This is the first crack. Her breath shuddered out, and she sank into the nearest chair, shoulders slumping. For the first time, I saw relief flicker through her fear. She'd crossed her line, chosen a side. I folded the slips carefully and slid them into my jacket. They weren't just papers. They were proof of systematic abuse, tied directly to Marcus's hand. And now, thanks to Laura, the structure of his power was beginning to collapse from within. I left Laura's townhome with the folder pressed tight under my arm, the weight of it heavier than any yellow slip Marcus had posted on my door. The evening air smelled of lake water and grill smoke drifting from a porch down the street. Ordinary sounds and scents layered over something far darker. For the first time, I wasn't just carrying my own proof, I was carrying hers. And that shifted everything. By the time I got home, the streetlights had flicked on, throwing cones of pale light across the cul-de-sac. Emily was curled on the couch with a blanket, half watching some sitcom that couldn't mask her restlessness. She glanced at the folder as soon as I stepped inside. "What's that?" she asked. "Evidence," I said simply, setting it on the table. I didn't explain further. She didn't need the details yet. What she needed was to see I wasn't bowing under Marcus's weight. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, then softened, the tension in her face easing just a little. I brewed coffee though it was late, the bitter smell filling the kitchen, while I spread the folder's contents across the table. Dozens of violation slips, all with the same looping scrawl, the same recycled accusations. Improper landscaping, excessive parking, unauthorized storage. Some were even word-for-word duplicates, issued months apart to different homes. Laura was right. He hadn't just been harassing. He'd been shaping the neighborhood like a puppeteer pulling strings. I turned on my laptop, the blue glow washing over the table. The compliance app synced automatically, pulling up the videos, audio logs, and now scanned copies of Laura's slips. They stacked into neat digital boxes, each one time-stamped and geotagged. On their own, they were small cuts. Together, they formed a wound no inspector could ignore. I started building a chain. First, the pool incident, guards shoving Emily, Marcus silent. Next, the cul-de-sac sweep, guards laughing about fines, slips plastered on driveways. Then Laura's evidence, perfectly aligning with property sales. My screen filled with a map of Cypress Point, little red markers blinking at every logged incident. The pattern wasn't just harassment, it was systemic abuse, coordinated to control. The deeper I organized, the more the old instincts surged back. I remembered nights hunched over blueprints, red pen circles marking unsafe welds, overlooked reinforcements, shortcuts that risked collapse. The HOA was no different. Marcus had built a facade of power on intimidation and forged paper, but structurally it was rotten. And I knew exactly where to strike. As I worked, I kept glancing at Emily. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, the blanket pulled to her chin, her face softened in sleep. The bruise on her shoulder peeked above the collar of her shirt. That mark was why I couldn't let up, why this couldn't be another quiet surrender to HOA pressure. This was personal, yes, but it was also professional. I'd spent years making sure unsafe systems couldn't hurt people. Marcus had just made himself my latest inspection. Near midnight, I pushed back from the table, rubbing my temples. The folder sat neatly emptied, its contents digitized and preserved. I slid it into the drawer, locked it, and tucked the key into my pocket. Laura had risked everything handing me those slips, and I wasn't going to let her fear be wasted. I looked around the kitchen, the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, the faint rustle of leaves outside. This house had been my wife's dream, the lake her sanctuary, the pool fence her victory. Marcus had turned every symbol into a weapon, but symbols could be reclaimed. I opened the compliance app one last time, tapping through the chain until I reached the final step. Auto report enabled. The screen confirmed the system was primed to forward every new entry directly to the city's safety oversight portal. No delays, no chance for Marcus to intercept. From here on, every slip, every shove, every laugh would bypass fear and land straight in official hands. The app's red icon pulsed steady, a heartbeat against the dark. I shut the laptop with a quiet click, the sound final in the still kitchen. Marcus thought he was burying me under paper. He hadn't realized I'd just turned every sheet into a weapon against him. I looked at Emily, asleep, safe for the moment. "It's set," I murmured. "The next move is his, and the city will be watching." The next move came quicker than I expected. By Saturday morning, the clubhouse lawn was lined with folding tables and clipboards. Marcus had organized what he called a compliance sweep, a public spectacle designed to humiliate homeowners into obedience. Bright banners reading Community Integrity Drive flapped in the breeze, masking what it really was: a shakedown. Emily trailed beside me as we walked toward the scene. She tugged at the strap of her backpack, her eyes darting between the tables and the guards posted at every corner. Parents stood in small clusters, whispering, holding notices of their own. I recognized the same yellow slips Laura had handed me, clutched in fists, tucked into purses. The air buzzed with unease, the lake reflecting sunlight like broken glass. Marcus stood front and center, crisp polo tucked into pressed khakis, his voice booming through a portable speaker. "This is about standards, about keeping Cypress Point the place we all agreed to live in." His gaze swept the crowd like a ruler measuring worth. "Non-compliance won't be tolerated. Fines will be enforced immediately." I felt Emily shrink closer to me, her shoulder brushing my arm. I slipped my phone from my pocket, thumb brushing the red icon. The compliance app blinked alive, its camera aimed squarely at Marcus. Each word, each order, would be archived and sent straight to the city. He wanted a show. He was about to get one. The guards moved through the crowd with clipboards, demanding signatures, threatening higher fines for delays. I watched as one cornered the Ramirez's, pen tapping against the paper, while their youngest tugged at his mother's sleeve. Another guard waved a slip in Laura's direction. She stood stiffly near the back, her jaw tight, eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second before looking away. Fear still held her, but I could see the strain in her posture, the guilt of silence fighting to the surface. I let the moment stretch before stepping forward. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I moved toward the nearest guard. He thrust a clipboard at me without hesitation. "Violation acknowledgement. Sign or we double the fine." I took it slowly, scanning the paper. The language was generic, boilerplate phrases cut and pasted, no reference to the actual bylaws. My lips curved into a thin smile. Perfect. I pulled a pen from my pocket, signed with deliberate precision, and handed it back. The guard smirked, triumphant, until I lifted my phone high enough for the camera to catch the slip in his hand. "You might want to check your signatures," I said evenly. "That one just got filed in real time, with a city timestamp. When the inspector sees you demanding payment without citing a single bylaw, I wonder how long this operation stays open." The guard froze, color draining from his face. Marcus noticed the exchange, his voice stuttering for a moment over the speaker. The crowd stirred, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. I didn't press further. Instead, I moved deliberately through the tables, recording everything. Guards demanding signatures, neighbors handing over checks, Marcus grinning like a ringmaster at the center of his circus. Each clip locked itself into the compliance chain, one more nail in the coffin he'd built with his own arrogance. Laura's eyes followed me as I passed, her hands twisted together, knuckles white, but when one of the guards turned on her again, she shook her head firmly. It was small, almost invisible, but it was defiance, and Marcus saw it too. His jaw tightened as he adjusted the microphone. "Some of you think you can play games," he said, voice sharper now. "Let me be clear, this community survives on order. Without it, property values collapse. Without it, families suffer." He lifted a slip high, waving it like a banner. "And I won't allow that." The irony was sharp enough to taste. Property values were exactly what he was sabotaging, one false violation at a time. I kept filming, steady and silent, letting him dig deeper with every sentence. Emily tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "They're all watching you." She was right. Dozens of eyes had turned my way, neighbors seeing that someone wasn't cowering, wasn't folding. The silence was breaking, piece by piece. When it ended, Marcus strutted back toward the clubhouse, guards trailing behind him. But the crowd lingered, murmurs louder now, suspicion threading through fear. I pocketed my phone, satisfied. The compliance sweep hadn't broken me. It had given me exactly what I needed. Marcus thought today proved his control. What he didn't realize was that every word he'd spoken, every slip his guards had waved, had just been sealed into a report he could never erase. The crowd dispersed slowly after Marcus's compliance sweep, their voices hushed but sharper than I'd ever heard in this neighborhood. I walked Emily back to the house, each step measured, my phone heavy in my pocket with the recording sealed inside it. The silence between us wasn't fear this time, it was anticipation. She could feel it too. The tide had shifted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining room table under the low hum of the overhead light, piecing together the puzzle with the precision of the job I'd once lived by. Video logs, audio clips, scanned slips, all threaded into a timeline that showed more than harassment. It showed a system, a deliberate, coordinated abuse of authority. And now, with Marcus so desperate for control that he'd staged a public spectacle, the pattern was undeniable. By dawn, my eyes ached, but the case was clean. I uploaded the package through the compliance app's portal, the files blinking one by one into the city's server. Once, I would have had to drive downtown, fill out forms, argue with clerks to get attention. Now, the technology made it immediate. My finger hovered over the final confirmation. Emily padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. "You're still up," she murmured, glancing at the glowing screen. I smiled faintly. "Almost done." Then I tapped send. The progress bar filled, green and steady, until the words flashed. Submission forwarded to safety oversight. Pending review, my shoulders loosened for the first time in days. I shut the laptop and took Emily outside. The morning air was cool, lake mist clinging to the grass. Birds cut across the pale sky, and for a moment, the neighborhood looked like the place my wife had once believed in. But I knew better. Rot had settled under the surface, and soon, outside eyes would see it too. By mid-afternoon, I got my answer. A pair of white sedans pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. City inspection decals gleaming on their doors. Inspectors stepped out. 2 men and a woman, clipboards in hand, reflective vests bright against the brick backdrop. Their movements were brisk, no nonsense. I stood at the edge of the lot, Emily beside me, as Marcus hurried from the clubhouse. He wore that same smirk, though it faltered when the inspectors flashed badges. I couldn't hear their words from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I knew the process. Credentials first, operating permits second, insurance verification third. His guards lingered awkwardly nearby, hands shoved in pockets, no badges on their belts, no paperwork in sight. The woman inspector pointed toward the guard shack, then toward the pool fence. One of the guards stammered something, gesturing vaguely at the slips in his clipboard. The inspector shook her head, jotting notes. Marcus's face reddened, his hands chopping the air as he tried to regain control. But the inspectors didn't bend. They didn't work for him. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, drawn by the sight. Laura stood at the back of the group, arms crossed, her chin high. The Petersons whispered to each other. Even the Ramirezes edged closer, their children tugging at their hands. Fear was giving way to curiosity, to the possibility of change. The inspectors moved inside the clubhouse. Marcus followed, his stride stiff. I stayed where I was, phone in hand, the red icon blinking as I recorded the scene. This was his unraveling, and I wasn't going to miss a second of it. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then the inspectors emerged, their expressions firm. One carried a stack of files, Marcus's records, seized for review. Another posted a notice on the clubhouse door. Operation suspended pending compliance review. The words glared in black ink against the white paper, official and final. The crowd erupted in murmurs. I caught Marcus's eyes across the lot. His smirk was gone. For the first time since this began, he looked cornered. Emily tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Does this mean it's over?" I shook my head, watching Marcus retreat toward the clubhouse steps. Not yet. This was just the inspection. The confrontation comes next, and I knew where it would happen, in the place Marcus thought was his throne, the HOA meeting hall. Soon, he would stand before the very people he'd silenced, with inspectors and witnesses ready to speak. And when that moment came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The truth would do it for me. The HOA meeting hall smelled of dust and old carpet cleaner, a space that had always felt more like a courtroom than a community gathering place. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, every seat taken, neighbors who usually avoided eye contact in. The street now sat shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with restless energy. At the front, under the glare of fluorescent lights, Marcus adjusted the microphone, trying to hold on to the authority that had already slipped through his fingers. Emily sat in the second row beside me, her eyes darting between the inspectors stationed near the wall and the guards lingering uneasily at the back. Laura was there too, her posture rigid, a folder balanced in her lap. She hadn't spoken yet, but I could see it in her clenched jaw. The decision had been made. She wouldn't stay silent tonight. Marcus tapped the mic, his voice booming. "Let's get this started. There have been misunderstandings circulating in the community. False accusations, unfounded claims. I want to make it clear that the board remains committed to integrity and order." The crowd shifted, some heads nodding, others frowning. His words landed with less weight than they once had. The inspector's presence changed everything. I leaned back, letting him talk himself into the hole he dug. He shuffled a stack of papers theatrically, waving one high. "We've received reports of harassment against board members, deliberate non-compliance, and attempts to undermine our governance. Certain residents," his eyes cut toward me, "have been pushing their own agenda at the expense of this community's safety." The murmurs grew louder. I stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor, drawing every eye to me. I didn't need the microphone. My voice carried steady, deliberate. "You mean residents who refuse to accept fabricated violations? Or maybe residents who've been documenting unlicensed security patrols and expired insurance?" "Which one, Marcus?" Gasps rippled across the room. The inspectors exchanged glances, jotting notes. Marcus's face tightened, but he forced a smile. "Baseless?" he said quickly. "There's no proof." Laura rose from her seat before he could continue. Her hands shook, but her voice was clear enough to cut through the noise. "There's proof." She held up the folder, the same one she'd given me days before. "These are violation slips Marcus issued to homeowners, including mine, targeted to sabotage property sales. I lost contracts because of him." The room erupted. Neighbors leaned forward, voices overlapping. The inspectors stepped forward, collecting the folder from her hands, flipping through the pages with quick efficiency. Marcus slammed his palm on the desk. "Out of order! She's lying to protect herself." "Is she?" I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. The red icon glowed faintly as I tapped the screen. Speakers crackled as audio filled the room, the guards' laughter from the cul-de-sac, their voices bragging about the fines. Then, video. Marcus at the pool, silent as Emily was shoved into the fence. The room went still, every eye fixed on the screen. The inspectors didn't need to say a word. The silence of the crowd said it for them. Shock, anger, betrayal. Someone in the back muttered, "My son got one of those slips last month." Another voice snapped, "We paid hundreds for landscaping fines." The tide had turned. Marcus's composure cracked. He gripped the microphone stand with white knuckles, his voice rising, desperate. "This is manipulation. You think one man's recordings can undo years of governance? You'll regret siding with him." But his threats landed flat. The fear that had once kept this room silent had evaporated. Neighbors stood one by one, voices overlapping, demanding answers. The inspectors raised their hands for quiet, then spoke firmly. "Effective immediately, enforcement authority is suspended pending full compliance review. All fines collected under unauthorized citations will be audited. The board is hereby notified that further action will follow." The crowd roared, not with fear, but with release. People clapped, some shouted, others simply sat stunned. Laura exhaled sharply, tears brimming as relief cracked her rigid mask. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. I watched Marcus sink back into his chair, face pale, smirk gone. He'd built his power on silence, but silence had broken tonight. For the first time, the community wasn't staring at me as the troublemaker. They were staring at him as the fraud. And the real judgment hadn't even begun. The hall emptied slowly, neighbors leaving in clusters, voices buzzing with something I hadn't heard here before: hope. The inspectors packed up their files, professional and brisk, but I caught the faint nod from one of them as they passed. It was the kind of nod that said, "We'll handle this now." Marcus remained slumped at the front table, face drawn, eyes darting like he was still calculating an escape. But the power had shifted too far. No threats left, no smirk to hide behind. He looked smaller without the silence of the community propping him up. Emily tugged my hand as we stepped outside. The night was cooler, stars scattering above the lake. Porch lights glowed across the neighborhood, and for once, blinds didn't snap shut when I walked past. People lingered on sidewalks, talking in low, urgent tones, comparing stories. Some clutched violation slips. Others just shook their heads. Fear was giving way to anger, and anger was giving way to unity. Laura joined me at the curb. Her face was tired, eyes rimmed red, but her shoulders no longer sagged with indecision. "It's not over," she said, voice soft but steady. "No," I agreed. "But tonight was the break. The rest will follow." She nodded, glancing toward the clubhouse where the suspension notice still flapped in the breeze. For the first time, she didn't look afraid of it. She looked ready. Back at the house, I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her pool bag abandoned on the floor. She traced her finger over the scrape on her shoulder, now faded but still visible. "Do you think they'll fix it?" she asked quietly. "They will," I said, pulling out a chair across from her. "Not just the fence. All of it. The inspectors will force changes, the fines will be audited, and Marcus won't sit in that chair again." Her eyes lifted to mine, doubt flickering for a moment before it melted into something steadier. "Mom would have liked tonight," she said. My throat tightened, but I managed a smile. She would have. She fought for that fence because she believed this place could be better. Tonight proved it still can. Later, when the house was quiet, I stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled faintly of rain drifting in from the lake. Across the street, neighbors still stood in small circles, voices carrying faintly. They weren't whispering anymore. The silence Marcus had ruled with was broken. I leaned against the porch post, looking toward the pool where the trouble had started. The fence glimmered faintly in the streetlight, iron bars standing straight. To most, it was just metal. To me, it was a promise. My wife's legacy hadn't been tarnished. It had been defended. Emily would grow up knowing that when someone tried to weaponize fear against her, the answer wasn't retreat. It was resistance. The inspector's notice on the clubhouse would be the first of many. Lawsuits, restitution, elections. Those battles would unfold over months. But the shift had already happened. Tonight, neighbors had seen the truth. Tonight, Marcus had been stripped of his power. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the compliance app still open, its red icon blinking steady. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a reminder. Evidence had replaced silence, and silence had always been Marcus's strongest weapon. Emily stepped out onto the porch, blanket draped around her shoulders. She leaned against me, eyes fixed on the same fence in the distance. "Do you think it's really over?" "It's never completely over," I admitted. "There will always be another Marcus, another fight. But the difference is we're not standing alone anymore." She nodded, her head resting lightly against my arm. We stayed that way for a while, the hum of crickets rising around us, the quiet broken only by the occasional laugh from neighbors down the street. It was the sound of a community waking up. And as I stood there, I realized this story wasn't just about a fence or fines or one man's abuse of power. It was about what happens when fear cracks and people step forward. It was about a daughter who refused to break, a wife whose legacy endured, and a neighborhood that finally remembered its voice. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.